Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to SeaWeek for 2023. We are halfway through our amazing program of events promoted by Virtual Excursions Australia, and we're very excited today to have Megan from the Australian National Maritime Museum to be exploring ocean plastics. So there will be lots of opportunities to ask questions as well. So questions you can put in the Q&A. And you can put your comments to some of Megan's amazing questions to you in the chat. So I'll hand over to Megan now. Very excited about this program, and yeah, get ready, and a great opportunity to learn more about our oceans and what we can do to protect them for SeaWeek 2023.
All right. Hello. Thank you, Karen. I'm just going to share my screen and we're all good to go. So welcome to the Australian National Maritime Museum. My name is Megan and I have the absolute joy of being our Digital Education Officer. And I absolutely love being able to talk to kids all over Australia. I saw we had some registrations from lots of different states, New South Wales, where I am, down in Victoria and Queensland, and all the way over to Western Australia. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I also want to thank everyone of all different age groups as well. So we have lots and lots of different age groups joining us as well. And that means that while this is kind of mid-primary school age group, we'll try and make sure there's something for everyone. And if something's a little bit hard, please feel free, pop it in the chat or the Q&A, pop a question in the Q&A and I'll explain something a little bit better. Or if you want to know more, if you're a little bit older, also pops those questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them towards the end. I also want to let you guys know that throughout this session, there'll be times where I'm asking questions. If you're a class in your classroom, I'll get the teacher or a representative of that classroom to just type in the chat. So get all the answers from your class, type it in the chat. I might be asking some sort of a true or false question, do sort of the consensus. Or if you're a homeschool student, you're more than welcome to pop your answers in as well. It's great to be able to share with so many different people and students across Australia today. Before I go any further, I want to do something really important here at the Australian National Maritime Museum. And so here at the Australian National Maritime Museum, we do an acknowledgement of country. You've probably heard this before, but it's really important for us. We can see we're in the beautiful Sydney Harbour, Darling Harbour, but we really need to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the Bamal, the earth, and the Badu and waters on which I get to work. We also acknowledge all traditional custodians of the lands and waters throughout Australia and pay our respects to them, their elders, past and present. And I want to extend that acknowledgement of country and respect to all of the traditional owners on whose land you guys are watching today, and just sort of say that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been looking after their oceans for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the oceans, the waterways. And so it's great to be able to acknowledge that in SeaWeek this week. And towards the end, I'll show you an example of how they are continuing to do that even today. But before we start, this session is all about ocean pollution, ocean plastic. But I want us to have a think about what is pollution. Just in your class or in your head, have a think, what is pollution? Okay, I'm going to play a video now that's got one of our amazing science curators telling us a little bit about what pollution is, the problems that we have with it, and why it causes such a big issue in our oceans.
Anything that does not naturally occur in the ocean, that causes harm or is poisonous, is marine pollution. Today, the range of things that are considered marine pollution is on the rise. Most marine pollution is rubbish or chemical and waste runoff that comes from land. Chemicals, particles, and waste from industrial and agricultural sources and houses make up 80% of marine pollution. One of the biggest sources of marine pollution is plastic. Now, not all plastics are small when they enter the ocean. The sun's UV rays help break down larger plastics. During this process, chemicals leak into the environment. As they degrade, large plastics become microplastics like you see here, which are broken down plastic particles that are 5 millimeters or smaller. Recent studies have now found plastic particles that are even tinier, called nanoplastic. Microplastics are found at the greatest depths in ocean trenches, 11 kilometers down, sited on mountains, in the air, and in our own bodies. They are found in all Earth environments. We still manufacture new products using plastics, while some natural materials have become more scarce and expensive. However, there is good news. People are more aware now than ever before of the impact of plastics on our environment. Some companies are using the plastics problem as an innovative design challenge to create new materials from natural or biodegradable sources to replace the plastic versions. Other businesses are recycling found rubbish back into other plastic products so that they get a second life. Now, the best means of prevention is to ensure that the plastic never gets to the ocean from land, to stop it at the source. Community groups and researchers stage targeted cleanup crews to clean beaches and fish waste out of the ocean. More strict policies for industry and agriculture processes help stop or slow excess waste entering waterways. More and improved sustainable products and packaging are becoming available for consumers to choose.
Behind me in the water is the museum's sea bin. Sea bins are mounted to floating docks or wharves in heavily trafficked areas to maximize collection of rubbish. Most rubbish comes from land. Land is the source, so we like to try and stop it before it can work its way into the ocean.
You can help keep the ocean and other waterways clean of plastics and other pollution. One of the great drivers of our industry is consumer demand. So demand more sustainable practices by making some choices in your own life. Opt out of single-use plastics, microbeads, and chemical fertilizers. Remember to reduce, reuse, and recycle. And if you can, participate in cleanups in your community.
All right, so that was a great introduction to plastic and particularly ocean plastic as well. And we're going to go into a little bit more depth in these in the next few slides. Ooh, don't need to watch it again. So plastic. Plastic is something that we use all the time. So I would like to ask you, do you use plastic every day? What do you think? Do you use plastic every day? Okay, so what I might ask you to do is pop this in the chat. If you do use plastic every day, you can say yes. If you don't think you use plastic every day, you can say no, or say you're not sure. If you're a class, say what the majority of people think. All right. Do you think you use plastic every day? What do we think? All right. So popping all of that in the chat. And then if you've got any extra questions that are coming up that we can answer later, those can go in the Q&A. But I think the majority of people in some of our classes, the majority of, just about everyone's saying yes. And of course, most of us use some type of plastic every day. Now, the next question I had is true or false, plastic is useful. So we've established that most of us use plastic every day. We use lots of different types of plastic. Plastic is useful. True or false? Pop that in the chat as well. Thank you, everyone. I can see everyone's really thinking about this. It's such an important thing because, yeah, plastic is actually quite useful. And if we think about it, we have plastic that ends up in the ocean and is rubbish, but we also have plastic that's really, really important to our daily lives. Lots of things like the reusable containers you might use as your lunchbox or to store leftovers in and things like that. Those are really useful plastics that we use all the time. But there is some things that are made of plastic that are a little bit silly and a little bit excess. So I liked, we do have one answer that sometimes yes and sometimes no. So plastic is actually made from oil or gas or coal or minerals or plants. There's lots of different types of plastic. And it is actually useful stuff. It can help keep our food and water fresh. It can be made into any different shape. It's great for storing and carrying things and transporting things from one place to another, like your lunch from your home to your school. Or if you're going out on a picnic, you might take some food with you that's stored in plastic. It lasts a long time, so it can be very durable. And it's cheap to make. And that's why a lot of packaging is plastic, because it's actually really cheap for companies to make it. Where did it come from? Plastic is a relatively new thing, first made in 1869. So that's a fair few years ago, before any of us were alive, but it is still relatively new. And it was actually made to replace things that had been previously created using ivory from elephants. So ivory is elephants' tusks, and that was a really expensive, really material that lots of fancy people would make things out of. And it was really useful. And so they actually used plastic to help save the elephants. It was also used as an electrical insulator to stop you getting zapped from your electrical cables and wires. But production has increased dramatically after World War II. It's actually, unfortunately, started being noticed in our oceans even back in the 1960s. So that is, 60 years ago, we were starting to see this plastic creep into our ocean, and it's accelerated and got so much more. So plastic, really good, in most cases, but not always. And it's, compared to the history of humans and the history of our Earth, it's a fairly new problem. But ocean plastic is what we're going to focus on for the rest of this session. And this is plastic that ends up in our oceans. Now, I'm going to play a video. And this is a video of some of the types of rubbish and plastic that ends up in our oceans. See if you can spot some different types of plastic that you recognize and pop that in the chat. So I can see all of these amazing things that you're popping in the chat. So what ocean plastics do you recognize? There's no sound with this one. It's just looking at this plastic that's floating on the surface of the water. And because a lot of plastic is quite light, it does float, but not all plastic floats. So some, or it might be if a plastic bag gets filled with water, it might sink. So lots of different types of plastics. Okay, so I've had a few people who've seen some straws. Yeah, there's some plastic straws in there. Oh, someone saw a Smith's chip packet or, yep, other wrappers, Mentos packet. Oh, a post office slip. That's a very good catch. Lolly wrappers, chip bag, piece of foam, fishing net. You guys have caught it all. Lots of different things in this video. Parcel ties, yeah, the type of plastic that goes around parcels and boxes. Yeah, plastic cups and bottles, Tupperware lids. So occasionally that good plastic that we want to use every day can end up as rubbish. Nets. Oh, someone saw a peg. A toy car. There's lots of different types of plastics, a toothbrush. All of this stuff can become ocean plastics if it ends up in our ocean. And after time in our ocean, it breaks apart and it turns into this. This is called microplastic. And I've got some here, can't really see it, but it's super like little tiny small bits. So it's on the video there, you can see a bit more close up. So plastic does not break down the way that materials like paper or cardboard do. It doesn't disappear. Instead, it breaks apart into tiny, tiny little bits. So all these little tiny bits of plastic continue in our oceans for an incredible amount of time. And this is all different types of plastic. So it can be, one of the worst is polystyrene. Let's see if you can kind of see this. So this was just used in packaging to stop something from breaking while it was being transported. And all these tiny little bits of plastic can break apart, kind of like snow or beanbag beans. And they end up in the ocean. But even harder, more plastics over time and with the exposure to the sun will break up into microplastics. And there was I saw a question from Jack and Alex in the Q&A asking, does plastic break easily? And it depends on the type of plastic, but all plastic will eventually, with time, exposure to the sunlight and the water in our ocean, will break apart into microplastics. So some like polystyrene, all you have to do is basically touch it and it breaks into those little beads. But other plastics, like even here, you can see the type of plastic your lunchbox might be made of or something, will over time break and break into these smaller pieces. So we've been talking about this problem, this ocean plastic problem, and these are just some of the examples of ocean plastic that end up in our waterways. So what can we do? Going from the negative to the positive, I'd like you as a class, or if you're a homeschool student, pop it in the chat, have a bit of a brainstorm. What are some of the things that you guys might be able to do to actually help combat this issue of plastic in our oceans, in our waterways, our rivers and streams and dams as well? So what are some of the things we can do give you another few moments to keep thinking, keep talking as a class. Okay, lots of great answers coming through in the chat here. I like this one from class 3C. Stop using as many plastics. And that's definitely something we can do. Think about, we will all use plastic every day, but think about the amount of plastic you use every day. And even if you can just take out a couple of those pieces, start slowly, you'll eventually build up to reducing a huge amount of plastic, particularly the disposable stuff, the stuff that we don't need. And so start slowly reducing the amount of plastic you are using. All right. Yeah. So we've got lots, I'm having to scroll up, lots of other containers. Do not litter, as I've seen a couple of times. So think about where your plastic ends up. When we do have to use plastic, make sure that it ends up where it's supposed to end up, whether that's the rubbish or the recycling bin, depending on your local area. Double check the rules for what can be recycled and what has to go in the rubbish. But make sure you pop things where they're supposed to be, because if you see some plastic or you accidentally leave some plastic in a park or on the road, or so it blows away, it will eventually end up in your stormwater drains or the rivers and streams, and eventually that all leads to the ocean. So by whether it's not littering ourselves or picking up any litter that we do see, and whether that's in your school playground, whether that's in your local park or on the street if you're going for a walk, make sure that there isn't that plastic litter that will end up in our oceans. There are also lots of different types of plastic, so using alternatives to plastic. And we've got a great comment here talking about biodegradable plastic. And increasingly people are starting to use plastics that are actually better for our environment. So plastics that actually can, in some cases, be a lot easier to recycle or easier to get rid of. All right, we can, yeah, as I said, you can do cleanups, whether it's of your local park or local area, your beach. And it was recently Clean Up Australia Day as well. So I hope some of you guys were able to participate in some of those activities as well. We can also use other materials. And I'm sure lots of people have actually seen our government starting to put rules in place to actually reduce the amount of plastic that we use. So in New South Wales, where I am, things like straws are now paper straws, not plastic straws, and things like not using plastic cutlery and not being provided with that when you go to buy some takeaway food or something. We're starting to actually use a lot more alternatives to plastic. And this is an interesting comment as well, which has come up with new ideas about how plastic can be recycled, reused, and kind of degraded in the end. And that's something scientists are actively working towards. And definitely when you guys get to be a little bit older, that work is going to be continuing. And so developing new materials that are better for our environment are actually a big part of science, which is really, really interesting. And telling people about that. So you guys came up with lots and lots and lots of amazing ideas. And we're actually going to talk about a couple of examples of things that some different groups of adults are doing to also help the plastic pollution problem. And they give us some ideas about what we can do in the future as well. So one of these projects is a project called SeaBin. And if some people might be around, particularly around Sydney or around kind of our coastal waterways, there's a chance you might have seen one of these. If not, I've got a video in a moment, so you'll be able to see a SeaBin in action. This is actually an invention. So one way people can combat this problem is by inventing things, creating things that will help with the issue. And this is actually something that helps plastic that's made it into our waterways, but not out into the ocean yet. It tries to catch it and then means we can dispose of it properly rather than it ending up in our ocean. So sea bins are an absolutely fantastic invention. We actually now have 3 at this museum to actually catch some of the stuff that we now see in our oceans. So I'm going to show you a little video, and then we'll have some time for any questions that come up while we're watching this video. Pop them in the Q&A and we can answer them at the end.
Hey Matt, how's it going?
I'm good, how are you? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome to the Australian National Maritime Museum.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Should we go down and have a look at the sea bin?
I'd love to. Wow, the sea bin. So, what's it do? Tell me more about it, Tom.
So it runs 24/7. It filters 16,000 litres of water every 24 hours. And as you can see, the water goes in the top and then it's filtered through the bottom of the unit. And what's left in the catch bag at the top is basically anything that's floating. So, yeah.
Are they only found kind of in the local area? Are they in Sydney Harbour, around the world?
Yeah, so we've just ticked over about 1,000 worldwide.
1,000?
In around...
Did you say 1,000?
1,000,
wow.
Yeah. In around 37 countries.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of dotted all over the world.
Yep.
But the most condensed area is Sydney Harbour.
Yeah. We use plastic in our everyday life, drink bottles, toothbrushes, combs to comb our hair, pens we write with, and once we finish using them, we chuck them in the bin. So why do we need these sea bins in the ocean?
Well, we need them in the ocean because all of those items are ending up in the ocean. So our kind of argument, which we're kind of putting to government constantly, is if you have bins on land which are collecting all this rubbish, and we now have bins in the water which are also collecting the same amount of rubbish, then surely this sort of thing needs to be mandated by government. We need just as many bins as on land in the water.
So every day you travel around Sydney Harbour and you collect the waste from the bins. How much is in every bin?
So the global average is around 3.6 kilograms, but I can definitely say in Sydney Harbour you could easily double or triple that.
Wow.
As you can see, we're in a very urban environment, high population. CBD is right here. So what happens when the land-based bins get full, especially commercial bins which are just out on the street? Wind blows, rain, that rubbish flows into gutters, comes out of stormwater drains into the harbour. These urban environments and these harbours which are high traffic on land and in the water is where we need lots of sea bins.
So you said 3.6 kilos of rubbish in every bin. Is that the case?
Yeah, so that's the global average. But this unit, for example, would be averaging 5 or 6 kilograms a day. We have some units in the harbour averaging upwards of 20. So there's organic matter included in that, like seaweed, but the seaweed works with us to kind of grab all the microplastics and bring them into the units. But it's also, you know, things that weigh next to nothing, like soft plastics, plastic bottles, pens, as you mentioned.
So you're talking a lot about data. So what's the data telling us?
So the data story in Sydney Harbour is pretty scary. We're being able to show that we're pulling out around 300 kilograms of marine litter every week out of Sydney Harbour, for example. It's also showing most common items, which are polystyrene, soft plastics. The microplastic problem in the harbour is huge. A microplastic is defined as a plastic item smaller than 5 millimetres. It's good when they're that size because you can see them, but the really scary ones are the ones that are tiny and microscopic, that then get eaten by the fish, then get eaten by the birds and kind of go up the food chain.
I would have thought you go to the bins, you take the rubbish out and you just chuck it in another bin and hopefully it doesn't come back out into the ocean, but you're actually really analysing it very closely to learn more about plastic and where it comes from.
Yeah, for sure, because the data allows us, as I said, to tell a story which kind of can't be disputed. It's facts on a page. We can share that data with governments all over the world and it makes sense to everyone. It's really that international language because cleanup's not going to solve the problem of rubbish in the water. It's going to have an impact and it's very important, but the prevention aspect, the removing of these single-use items from society is what is going to have the big impact.
Do you find that the types of plastic getting into the bins in different locations in the harbour is different.
In this area, for example, we tend to get a lot of parking tickets in sea bins, which are obviously made out of plastic, first of all. And then we can look at stormwater drain maps, which are readily available to the public, and we can see how has this parking ticket arrived here from, say, Surrey Hills.
What can you do with that information to kind of stop that plastic getting into the ocean again?
So the data allows us to tell a story. We can share that story with the government and we can share it with the public. So we can empower the public and they can then lean on their local government, their council, and just be pioneers for the work that we're doing.
Yeah, and it's great work. It sounds like you're almost plastic detectives and you're kind of joining the pieces together, and once you've kind of figured out where it's all coming from, you can help come up with solutions that can benefit us all.
Yeah, that's totally plastic detectives. It's totally what it feels like some days. And for us, we're really passionate and it's really exciting and really fun because we have this issue, we have something floating in the water. Not only can we take it out, but we can also insert that into our data program and create this really valuable information which has never been gathered before. And the solutions are obvious. You know, if we're getting plastic parking tickets, let's stop making plastic parking tickets. Let's come up with another option.
Yeah.
So should we see what's in it?
Yeah, let's go.
3.5 kilograms.
Right on the mark, the average for the day.
Yeah, exactly.
The global average.
Yeah. We've got a plastic spoon. And all of these scary kind of little bits of plastic which have broken down into microplastics.
So thanks for coming today, Tom. It's been great learning more about the sea bin.
Yeah, thanks for having me and cheers for the chat.
Cool, no worries.
So that is Seabin, and that video was actually a year or two ago. But this is actually now showing what a Seabin actually does. It has a tiny little motor in it, so it uses a little bit of electricity, but we generate that electricity from solar power, so it is nice and sustainable. And that little pump means that the water flows into the Seabin, and any little bits of plastic that are floating on the surface of the water get drawn in and trapped in the Seabin. And you can see here, there's a plastic ball, there's a chunk of polystyrene. There is, I think there's a bottle in there as well. So there's lots of different material that gets pulled in, and over the course of the day, as they said in that video, we're getting about 4 kilos a day of plastic in the sea bins here at the museum. So it's really, really fascinating to kind of see how an invention like this, it was created they had the idea about 10 years ago. It took them a little while to develop it and now get them in the water. So there are lots more inventions like this that I'm sure you guys and people in the future are going to create that are going to do just as much amazing work for our oceans. Now, the sea bin can only work, for example, in our waterways and our harbours and things like that. So maybe in the future, someone might invent something for the Great Pacific Garbage Patch or other areas that have a lot of ocean plastic. And I can see lots of amazing questions. We might get to those at the end. This is just a photo of some of the different examples of bits and pieces of plastic that our sea bin catches. So you can see some of these bits are already starting to break up into little different bits, and there was also heaps of bits of microplastic as well. Another solution that a different group of people have actually come up with in terms of dealing with a different type of plastic pollution is a group of artists from the Torres Strait Islands. And if you don't know where that is, as a class afterwards, have a look on a map, find the Torres Strait Islands up to the north of Australia. And these are First Nations people who care really, really deeply about their waterways and the animals that live there. And they found that all of these fishing nets are made of plastic in many cases now, and they were discarded. They were rubbish. They were a different type of ocean plastic, and they were actually harming the animal life. So what these artists have actually done is they will clean these fishing nets and turn them into artworks. So we take these nets called ghost nets, and these amazing artists create beautiful artworks. And this is actually a communication strategy to teach people about both the importance of these creatures and our oceans, but also about ocean plastic and making a comment on these discarded fishing nets and rubbish that actually is what they use to create their artwork. So by telling people about it, teaching them about it, like what we're all doing today, I'm teaching you all about ocean plastic. That's another way that we can all help, by telling people about it, telling people that it's a problem and sharing with them solutions and how we can all help. And now, luckily, at the museum, if you ever get a chance to visit us here, we have some beautiful ghost net sculptures out in our foyer so that we can share that with all of the visitors who come to see us here at the museum. We're not just a museum of boats, we're also a museum that cares really deeply about anything to do with our oceans, and particularly ocean animals, the environment, and sustainability. So those are a few examples of things that different people are doing. You guys came up with a whole lot of amazing examples as well. And we do have some time to get to your questions. So we might start with questions. I can see a few about Seabin. And so 3-4 Turtles, I love that class name, have asked, what happens if the Seabin sucks in sea animals? And they do occasionally get a little tiny sea creature does get stuck. So the amount of, I guess, current that a sea bin generates isn't very much. And it's only in about a 6 metre wide circle around the sea bin. And most healthy sea animals should be able to swim away from it. So most healthy sea animals won't get stuck. You will occasionally find, for example, a fish, if it's sick or dead, will get caught in the sea bin, or occasionally a little jellyfish or something like that. But there is also really strict rules about this. It's called bycatch. And sea bin have done everything that they can, and they're really, really good in terms of following all of these rules to try and reduce the amount of sea animals that get stuck in the sea bin. So ever so occasionally they do find a little critter in there, a fish that's a bit sick or a little jellyfish who can't swim away. They will always try and, if they see it, make sure take it out of the sea bin. But what is, I guess, more important is making sure that all of the creatures are protected and our ocean is more healthy. And yes, occasionally 1 or 2 animals might get stuck. So let's have a next question. All right. So Jack and Alex have asked about, how do sea bins come back, or are they stuck in one place? So yes, they are stuck in one place. A sea bin is mounted, in our case, to pontoons that float on the water, because they do have to be plugged into power. So they have to be in that kind of one area. It works really well on things like pontoons and docks, because it can have that. And that's one of the restrictions with an invention like sea bin. It can't go in the surf, or it can't go out in the middle of the ocean. And that's where new inventions will have to be created in the future to help collect the plastic from those locations. All right, I love this question. How much rubbish goes into the ocean daily? Now, the big answer here is we actually don't know. And there is lots and lots of data out there that I don't know off the top of my head. So you can do your own research and find different people who've done research trying to work this out. But it's actually impossible, because over the whole world, there is so much rubbish and so much plastic that goes into the ocean through lots of different ways. People can litter on the beach. It gets washed through stormwater. It might fly, like those parking tickets. They mentioned some of those might have been carried by the wind. It's nice and light. Things like that. There's lots of different sources for ocean pollution and rubbish. And so it would actually be impossible to know for the whole world exactly how much, but it is an insanely huge number. And I noticed beforehand, one class asked about how Australia ranks in terms of our rubbish and the amount of plastic pollution that we put into the ocean. And we're not the best, we're not the worst. Depending on who you look at, we kind of sit halfway or a bit better than halfway. But so we're sort of middle of the pack. We can do a lot better in terms of reducing the amount of plastic pollution that we generate and that goes into our oceans. And we can also do better about cleaning up after ourselves as well. All right. 3C has asked, how would we see nanoplastic? So microplastic is something we can see with our naked eye. Like it's a bit hard for you guys to see on the screen, but between my fingers, I'm holding a piece of microplastic. I can see it. It's not quite a centimetre, but it's pretty big. It's probably 7 or 8 millimetres wide, that piece. Some of them are a little bit smaller. Nanoplastic is something that becomes really, really hard. Plastic keeps breaking up into smaller and smaller pieces until it still exists, but it can only be seen with a microscope. And scientists have now found, for example, in fish that we might eat, they're filled with bits of nanoplastic as well when they look under a microscope. So those fish have actually eaten the little tiny bits of nanoplastic by mistake, and then it kind of goes up the food chain. And so bigger fish, and eventually humans who eat fish caught in our oceans will actually get nanoplastics. So it becomes really tricky to see it because you need a microscope, but it's still there and it's still something that we need to be a little bit concerned about. All right, here's another question. Has the sea bin ever overflowed? And yes, it does. And so that's why the sea bins around Sydney are emptied every single day. So every single day, the sea bins are collected, and that generally prevents it from overflowing. So they can hold up to about 20 kilos of plastic and seaweed and bits and all of that stuff. And so generally on a normal day, it'll get to about 4, maybe 5 kilos. But if it's been very, for example, when there are big storms and there's lots of storm water, they'll keep a bit of a closer eye on it because they may need to empty it more frequently to stop it from overflowing. And unfortunately, if it does overflow, they'll empty it, they'll turn it back on, and then it'll start collecting that stuff that it overflowed as well. If the reason the sea bin is that size, because if it was any bigger, it would actually become too heavy and too big for a person to empty it. So that's why they can't make a giant sea bin, because a person actually has to be able to go and lift it and empty it and not hurt themselves. So that's why they've made sea bins that particular size. The other thing is, in areas that always get full, they just put more sea bins in. And so we now have 3. We originally had 1 sea bin when we made that video. We now have 3 sea bins here at the museum, and that also helps so they won't overflow because there's more sea bins to collect. All right. All right, this is a great question as well. Why are the nets called ghost nets? So the net sculptures that I showed you, we call them ghost nets because they're nets that are no longer, they're like disused, they're rubbish, they're ghosts floating in the ocean and not doing what they were made to do. And you can imagine that if you've got a big piece of fishing net floating in the ocean, it's going to look a little bit like a ghost. And also it's kind of, yeah, it's got to the end of its life. It's not being used as a net anymore. And that's why they're called ghost nets. And so by able to make sculptures out of the ghost nets, they're doing two things. They're actually removing the problem and protecting animals like, for example, turtles that would get caught and stuck in these nets and in some cases die. So by removing the problem, they're helping protect the environment and the ocean. And then they're also communicating the issues. So by having these beautiful sculptures in museums or people's homes, it's actually helping spread the word. So people like all of us are more aware of the issue. All right. All right. So if you have any other questions, I think we have a few more minutes. Yes, we've got some more time if anyone has any more questions to throw into the Q&A. Okay, I can see here a question from earlier. Where did I get all of the amazing stuff I've got in my background here? So all of the things I've got around me are actually part of our education collection. So that includes the shark mouth, it includes all of our beautiful shells. And I like to pop these out to sort of share the beauty of our oceans, because while we talk about the rubbish and the dirty stuff, it's also important to remember why this is important, and we want to protect our oceans. And so, for example, protecting our sharks, protecting our turtles is really important. And that's a big reason why it's important for us to reduce the ocean plastic, because those animals can accidentally eat ocean plastic. And imagine if your tummy's filled with plastic, you're not going to be getting the nutrients you need from real food, and they can become sick and die. They also get caught in it. If you're a turtle and your flippers get caught in a net or in plastic bags or something like that, it actually means that you can't swim properly. So we need to remember about these animals as one of, I guess, my favorite reasons why we really need to do something about ocean plastic. All right, and here's a question I don't know the answer to. How many types of plastic are there? Thank you for that tricky question. That might be one that everyone goes and has a look at, but there are lots and lots and lots and lots of different types of plastic. The sea bin actually have categories of plastic. So for example, they'll talk about soft plastic. So like, for example, of soft plastic, like a bread bag or something like this. And then you have hard plastic, like a coffee cup lid. Or you have different types of plastic. Plastics are also made of different materials, different types of, like if you go into the chemistry of it, they're made of different types of material. And so there's lots and lots of different ways you can categorize and talk about all the different types of plastic. So yeah, huge number. I'm actually not sure exactly how much plastic there is. All right, have you seen any other questions that I've missed, Karen?
No, that was fabulous. So we saw lots of things. I think, yeah, having that collection showing the reasons why it's great to be able to look after and protect our environment is wonderful as well. And thank you everyone for your wonderful questions and insights. It's so amazing to see some of the great engineering and the great ideas. And these ideas come from someone seeing a problem and looking for a solution. So think about them in the classroom. Think about ideas of how to maybe scale up sea bins, or thinking about the big garbage patch. So yeah, this is just that beginning of your journey into ideas about how you can help the environment as well, and to learn more about our amazing marine places. So we'll be sharing
Yeah.
lots of information from Megan and the Australian National Maritime Museum, as well as the follow-up and the recording as well. So I really appreciate you coming along, Megan.
Thank you. And I will just say one thing. I had the absolute pleasure to work with another organisation, the Australian Children's Television Foundation, on a great online resource all about some kind of ocean. We were talking about cleaning up our ocean and having that idea of thinking about inventions and stuff, as well as also thinking about ocean ecosystems and ocean animals. And so I've given Karen that link for a great online teaching resource that you guys might want to look at, all around the TV show The Deep. So if you want to try a brand new resource that we've only recently launched, that's a great one to have a look at. And please let us know what you think about it. Let us know if you have other ideas for other webinars or other resources that you'd like to see from myself or any of the other organisations that are a part of SeaWeek. It's always great to hear your ideas and hear what you want us to talk about next.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And yeah, very lucky everyone. It's kind of like a bit of a launch of resources for SeaWeek. So a great opportunity to continue the journey and continue those conversations in your family and in the classroom as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got sessions at 2 p.m. tomorrow with me that we're actually going to take a journey under the waves and learn a little bit about things that I might see when I'm scuba diving around Sydney Harbour. So kind of going from the sea bins from where Megan is at the Maritime Museum at Darling Harbour, sort of under the water and out Sydney Harbour to the heads, and we'll have an explore thing as well tomorrow at 2 p.m. So thanks everyone, and thanks again to Megan for joining us today.